So what we have here is a sort of layered application with three layers. We have the main code, and that's this guy here, and that's in a project called Runner. I'm just going to compile that into a set of classes. This will be com.knowledgespike.main, and the method's called main, and we just run this application. We also have a data access layer and a data service layer. The data service layer uses the data access layer. So my main code calls the service, and then the service calls the data access, and the data access actually does the write. And all we're doing is overcomplicating a write to a file. And we specify the file name here, so temp message.txt. So there are three separate projects. The service layer is this guy here, and the service layer gets given a reference to the data access layer, and it simply calls access.writeMessage. And the data access layer, which is this one here, when the write method gets called, creates a file writer and writes to the file stream. So the data service code and the data access code are compiled into jar files. So when I compile my code, I have a data access.jar and a service.jar. So to run this from the command prompt, we're going to run it with a security manager and with a policy file. And notice the class path points at both the data access.jar file and the service.jar file, and also at com.knowledgespike.main. The policy file looks like this. Now notice that we now have three grant blocks in here, one for each code base. So starting at the bottom, we have a grant block for the class files in demos call stack out production runner /star. So that's my com.knowledgespike.main class. And I give that permission to write to the temp message text file. We also have a grant entry for the code base with service.jar, and we give that the same permission. And we have a grant for data access.jar, and we give that the same permission. So if I go back to the command prompt, and from here run the code runs as you'd expect. And if I look in the temp folder, there's the message.txt file that we created. So let me go and delete that. Now if I go back to the policy file, so remember the runner code calls the service layer, and that calls the data access code. So we have these three classes on the stack frame at the same time, which then call down to the file writer, and the file writer actually writes to the file. So if I remove permission from one of these classes, then the call should fail. So let's just pick one at random. Let's take my service jar file here and comment out its permission to write to this file. Make sure I save that file, go back to the command prompt and run the code again, and now we get a security exception. So the access controller is checking everything that's in the stack frame and making sure we all have access, we're all allowed to write to this file, we all have permission. And if anything in the stack frame fails the check, then we get the security exception. So now that we've seen how to grant permissions based on code location, we can now take a look at how to grant permissions based on signing, so who actually created this code. And that's what we'll see in the next module.